host at number 10, the Old Arnold Estate. If you're a horror fan like myself, then part of you probably wants to visit this conjuring house. I don't know, like 10% of me wants to peek in. Or Ed and Lorraine's Museum of Horrors. I think I'd rather go there. The house in the film looked a lot fancier than it did in real life. It was more cinematic and they made it look even more creepy as a property in general, but that's what happens when you have millions of dollars in your budget. You're trying to make a more memorable horror film too. Now this is the real house. It's referred to by the Perron family as the Old Arnold Estate, and it's located in Harrisville, Rhode Island. On the real property, there's a barn to the left of the house, so I have to say, the original kind of seems way scarier than the movie. I don't know, barns creep me out. A lot of spiders. Aside from paranormal horrors, the Perron family also had to deal with financial ones. When the family did live there, a pipe burst and flooded their business, so they had to sell more than 85% of their new land. Number 9, witch history. The Conjuring film, the main plot here of course is a witch named Bathsheba Sherman, and it's haunting the grounds, or the house. It's a wickedly evil spirit, and the real Bathsheba was born in 1812. She married a Rhode Islander named Judson Sherman, and they had 4 children. Also, apologies if I'm saying her name wrong, but I'm kind of okay with that. I don't want this to be like a Beetlejuice situation where she just pops up randomly and just pukes in my mouth. Herbert Sherman, her firstborn, arrived when she was 37 years old. He lived a long life as a farmer and he grew old and all that jazz, but the other 3 children that were born afterwards, there's barely any information about them at all. Julia, Edward, or George. The mother, the witch, passed away on May 25th, 1885, 4 years after her husband did. Now there are stories that her body turned to stone when she died, or it was some sort of paranormal form of paralysis, because of course over time these stories change. It's like the longest game of broken telephone. Obviously a few things here are fake, but what the Perron family did find was the beginning of something very real. Number 8, Bathsheba's gravestone. The grave of the witch was found alarmingly close to the Perron family's new home, right on the property next door. Her resting place now is in the cemetery right across the street from the fire station near downtown Harrisville. So if you're ever visiting Rhode Island and you want to maybe, I don't know, be possessed by a witch, throw that in the GPS. Enjoy, and also, good game. They didn't initially think the strange happenings were because of a witch gravesite, obviously, that's not where their mind went to first, but that's when Ed and Lorraine were asked to help out, and they knew right away that it was, well, the witch next door. Number 7, the hauntings begin. The initial incident happened a few years before the paranormal investigators were actually called in. Carolyn, the mother, she was laying on the sofa and then all of a sudden her leg muscle started to have a spasm. Her calf was in this immense pain. She had no idea what was happening. It was out of nowhere. Then when she looked down to the ground, she saw this puddle of blood. She got stabbed by something. It was a very small puncture. And no, if you're thinking it was a bee, it wasn't. She looked and looked for a sign, anything to hint to what just happened, and she couldn't find anything. Also, it was a perfect circle. Carolyn described it as if it was a large sewing needle that went through her skin. Ouch. And in true witchy fashion, the Perron family also had broom problems. That's right, the broom would go missing or it would move place to place. And even more strange, Carolyn would sometimes find piles of dirt in the middle of a recently cleaned kitchen. You gotta love a helping, cold, dead hand. Number 6, levitating chair. In the movie, the exorcism happens at the end, of course. It's like a happy-ish ending, but in real life, that exorcism never took place. Lorraine Warren has since said that her husband, Ed, would have never performed such a thing, nor would he try. But Andrea Perron, one of the 5 children, has come forward many years later, and she said that she witnessed a seance with her mother, where her mother was speaking in a different language, and she also did not sound anything like her mom. Not even close, which is terrifying. And as Andrea recalls, her mother's chair then started to levitate like it did in the movie, and then after a beat, she was launched out of the chair across the room. It wasn't just Carolyn that experienced these horrible games either. As we saw in the film adaptation, the children too were busy with their own spirits. Number 5, the music box. We had to include one of the creepiest elements of the Conjuring movie, the Perron family music box. Director James Wan wanted to use this music box in the first film because, well, mirrors and creepy tones make for great suspense, but also this was a real haunted artifact from the real house. Today the box is safely stored in the Warrens Museum alongside other items that look more or less normal upon first glance, but they're actually extremely haunted. I'll get to those in a bit. This part in the movie actually scared the out of me. Any mirror scene, I can't do it. I always like eat my hoodie. They always do it so slow too. They're like I would slam it, just slam it, have toothbrushes fly out, I don't care, I'm scared. But this was real life, you can't forget that. This music box actually caused so much trouble for these poor girls. Specifically April, the youngest of the Perron children. She found this antique in the house and she used it to communicate to another spirit, the spirit named Rory. Number 4, other owners. Andrea Perron has told us that every single person who has once lived in this house, they all experienced some sort of paranormal activity. That's comforting. Some left this house screaming and running with only a few belongings. That would be me day one. I wouldn't even make it till night. I'd be out of there by 4:30 p.m. sharp. When the parents sold the house after all these haunting encounters, the guy who moved in then temporarily to start fixing up the house, he left too. He left without his car, he left without all of his tools, and yes, he even left without his clothing. Ghosts don't wait for you to put on pants. That's what I learned doing this. Ghosts do not wait. The current owners of the 18th century farmhouse, Corey and Jennifer Heisen, bought the home in June 2019. And yes, they've already seen stuff. You may ask, who in their right mind would move into a known haunted house? Well, paranormal investigators. That's exactly who. The scariest couple ever. They're like, oh, this is perfect. Over $1 million. They're like, debit, we'll take it. Let's get new wallpaper. So far, they've actually witnessed doors opening and closing on their own, and also loud knocks on the wall. Corey, the husband, admits to having a hard time on nights when he's all alone. He says he doesn't feel anything evil per se, but the house does feel busy. Number 3, the Warren Occult Museum. I mentioned the music box earlier, which sits now in the Warrens' creepy personal occult museum. Once belonging to the Perron family, the music box is one of many strange artifacts. In the museum, there is a vampire coffin. Yep, you heard me. A satanic idol, the conjuring mirror. There's a shadow doll that apparently has the ability to visit your dreams and in Freddy Krueger-like fashion, stop your heart while you're asleep. And also Annabelle is in there as well, but she's got friends. Annabelle has friends. You'll be pleased to know that Annabelle is actually the least creepy of all of them. A haunted pearl necklace puts Martha Wayne to shame right next to the haunted glass eyeballs, of course. I'd love to know more about the glass eyeballs. Let's see that movie. But one of the most fascinating items in here has to be the headless T-Rex toy. Is that from Toy Story? Is this Sid's room from Toy Story? What a crossover that would be. Number 2, other incidents. A total of 8 generations of one extended family lived and passed away in that same house, all before the arrival of the Perron family. Andrea has been quite vocal about the happenings, and to be fair, if I had a fraction of her childhood, I wouldn't shut the up. That sounds like an insane time. I would never sleep. She also confidently states that a lot of those souls never left the house. The Black Book of Burryville, which already sounds creepy, was the town's public records book at the time. And on the property there, it stated that there were 2 hangings that took place. Poison was used in a death type scenario. There were 2 drownings, not 1, but 2, and then 4 men who were passing by just happened to freeze to death on the property. Andrea has a book, it's called House of Darkness, House of Light. So if you're curious to read up on more of these happenings, go right to the source herself and support. Finally, number 1, a photograph of Bathsheba Sherman. You always see those UFO videos and they're filmed with like a BlackBerry curve. It's absolute trash, it's like 420p, it's horrible, not convincing at all. Not even, no zoom, no effort, just Cloverfields. There's never clear evidence of anything nowadays, but we may just have a clear photo with the real witch, Bathsheba Sherman. This photo is from the Perron family farmhouse back when it was still the Arnold estate. This was 1885, so the witch was most likely in her 70s at the time, but still it's hard to tell, the photo is still grainy. But that's because it was 1885, right? You know, it's not a BlackBerry. This is like the world's oldest, creepiest game of Guess Who. This witch lived next door to the farm, and although we'll never really know who is who, many believe she's the lady in the middle, closest to the camera, like right over here. Also, the fact that she's wearing some sort of mask makes this grainy photo even more haunting. She's standing by herself. I feel like the vibe of that group shot was off. Like nobody wanted to stand next to the literal witch. I don't blame them. Guys, do you think the real Bathsheba Sherman is in this photo? The lady on the left looks a little bit witchy. I don't know, who might have just—
Starting off this countdown, we have the Enfield haunting. This is the house and case that The Conjuring 2 was based off of. The case involved a young girl named Janet Hodgson, who was said to have been possessed by a spirit. The spirit would throw objects across the room, make noises in their house, and sometimes would even levitate Janet into mid-air. Ed and Lorraine Warren were assigned to this case and to expel the evil entity responsible for all of this. But turns out that Janet and her sister Peggy made up this whole thing. In 2015, when Janet was 45 years old, she said that her and her sister faked some of the phenomena. So according to researchers, most of the paranormal things happened when no one was actually looking at the 2 girls. Like they would have their backs turned to them and then all of a sudden an object would be thrown through the air. Well, obviously the girls were doing that themselves. They also said they captured audio of a dresser falling over on its own. But upon closer inspection, footsteps could be heard leading up to the dresser before it fell over, meaning someone likely pushed it over. And the photos of Janet apparently levitating in midair looked like she just jumped off her bed. So the whole Janet being haunted by a ghost, yeah, that was made up, and the Warrens went along with it. In our 9th spot, we have the credibility. Okay, now I was diving deep into Reddit looking at what everyone thought about the Warrens when I came across a post from a user named Jack_Shid. Jack claims that he worked alongside the Warrens for a couple of cases. He proceeded to reveal that they have no credibility and it's pretty much all BS. He goes on saying that he thinks they just fell in love with fame during the whole Amityville haunting and they created their business from there. So it could just be that they make up all these hauntings just to then make a book to then make money. But before I go any further, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up because it really helps us out. Moving on at number 8, we have the Amityville Horror. Probably one of the most controversial paranormal cases of all time. Because in the end, the whole thing was just one big sham. So here's a little rundown. On November 13th of 1974, Robert Butch DeFeo killed his parents and his 2 brothers and 2 sisters. The house was put up for sale and the Lutz family moved in. And apparently the demon that got Butch to do that horrific deed started to attack their family, and their doors and cupboards would swing open and close, green slime would ooze from their ceiling, and one time a demonic face with red glowing eyes was seen looking into the house. So on and so on. The Warrens went to investigate and confirmed that the house was haunted. But clearly that was a lie because guess what? Butch's lawyer, William Weber, admitted that he made up this whole story along with George Lutz. They created the story over many bottles of wine, they said. They admitted the house was never really haunted. They just made it all up. Which means so did the Warrens. In our 7th spot, we have the Werewolf Man. This was a pretty weird case if you ask me. But a man named William, or Bill Ramsey, claimed to have been possessed by a werewolf. Apparently he used to try and bite his family and also had superhuman strength. At one point he managed to rip a post right up from the concrete. So on and so on. You get it. He was claimed to be possessed by a werewolf. The Warrens were sent to exorcise this demon out of his body. And they talk all about this in their book, Werewolf, a true story of demonic possession. But a lot of people aren't buying this story. I mean, they haven't produced any photos or material evidence. And the story just seems so hard to believe. Like, a man possessed by a werewolf, and then he gets exorcised and he's just magically cured? No, a lot of people think that this case was all a sham as well. Moving on at number 6, we have the illegal relationship. A woman named Judith Penny came forward saying that in the early 1960s, she had a relationship with Ed Warren. This was going on when she was not of age. Ed was apparently in his mid-30s when he met Penny. Penny was 15. The two began to have a relationship with Lorraine knowing. In 1963, she moved in with them. She stayed in a bedroom right across the couple's room in their home. Now, Penny ended up coming forward with this because of how their relationship was displayed in the movies. They looked like such a loving, perfect Catholic couple. But they weren't. They had their dark side, especially Ed with his relationship with a young girl. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the baby. Now, Penny went on to expose a lot about the Warrens. In fact, in May of 1978, she got pregnant with Ed's child. But guess what? She was forced to abort the child. Apparently, if word got out, then this scandal could ruin their reputation. In fact, when Penny was living with the Warrens, they would lie and just say she was their niece or a poor girl that they took in out of the goodness of their own hearts. It's pretty sick if you ask me. Penny literally didn't have a choice but to get rid of the baby. In fact, they wanted Penny to tell everyone that someone broke into her apartment and took advantage of her, and that's how she got pregnant. She refused to do that, and they got so mad that she was terrified. Like, that's so heartbreaking. Moving on to number 4, we have the toxic relationship. Again, in the films, Ed and Lorraine Warren seem like a perfect demon fighting duo. You can tell that they love and care about each other dearly. Except, according to Penny, this wasn't the case in real life. She said that Ed was very physically and verbally abusive towards Lorraine. In fact, she said that one time she witnessed Ed backhand Lorraine so hard that she lost consciousness. In fact, he would often slap her across the face to get her to stop talking. Penny literally said, and I quote, "Some nights I've thought they were going to kill each other. That is terrifying." In our third spot, we have the Lady in White. One famous ghost is one called the Lady in White, who haunts Union Cemetery in Easton, Connecticut. According to the legend, she's the victim of betrayal by her lover, and she died either by taking her own life from being heartbroken or by being killed by her lover. Well, Ed was determined to capture her on tape and enlisted Penny's help. In fact, Penny helped keep Ed's reputation as a ghost hunter. So in the summer of 1990, Ed apparently camped out in the cemetery for a week trying to make contact with this ghost. The two faked a video of the Lady in White, which was just Penny. Anyways, he went on to make great claims that he made contact with her, but hardly any evidence was provided, just a few shadow ghosts on video, which we now know was Penny. Coming in at number 2, we have the Smurl haunting. Back in the 1980s, the Smurl family swore that their house was haunted. They would hear loud noises, smell foul odors, and hear pig grunts. Apparently, whatever was haunting their house also threw their dog against the wall and pushed one of their daughters down the stairs. Of course, Ed and Lorraine came to investigate, and they claimed it was haunted. They even said that they saw a message appear on a mirror that read, "Get out." But get this, members of the clergy were brought in to do a blessing and exorcism. And guess what? They reported nothing unusual happening there. But the Warrens were adamant that the house was haunted, and they turned the story into a book and then made money off of it. And in our number 1 spot, we have The Devil Made Me Do It. In 1981, a man named Arn Cheyenne Johnson was arrested after fatally stabbing his landlord to death. But his case was much different than others. He claimed that the devil made him do it. In fact, his case was the first court case where the defense was arguing demonic possession. And guess who was involved in all of this? Ed and Lorraine Warren. But turns out that Ed and Lorraine Warren might have concocted this whole story for him. So according to the story they put out, Johnson's brother-in-law, David Glatzel, was the first one to become possessed by a demon. He claimed a man with big black eyes and a thin face with animal features was controlling him. Johnson eventually went on to taunt this demon, telling it to stop bothering David and to take him instead. And I guess the demon did what he asked, because then Johnson was possessed by this demon, and that's what made him kill the landlord. But according to David's brother Carl, David was never possessed. He was just mentally ill and needed help from doctors. He then claims that his whole family was manipulated by the Warrens. They created this whole story about demons in an attempt to get rich and famous. According to Carl, the Warrens promised his family that they'd become millionaires if they would insist that both Carl and David were haunted by demons. In the end, he ended up suing the Warrens for trying to exploit his brother's mental illness, and for also attempting to get a guilty man to walk free.
Number 10, we have Arn Cheyenne Johnson. Not everything that the Warrens were involved in had to do with them going into a house to try and kick some spiritual butt. I mean, this case started like that, but then it turned into one of the most famous court cases of all time. Arn Cheyenne Johnson had the Warrens come to his home to help a young boy who was apparently possessed by a demon. The Warrens were successful in ripping the demons out of this boy's body, which there were apparently 40 of. But something went wrong. The demons left the boy's body, but then moved over to Arn Cheyenne Johnson's body. Can we just address a couple of things here? First, how many demons can fit into one body? This dude had a house party living inside of him, and that turned him completely evil. But what if you just had like 1 or 2 demons inside of you? Could you just keep living as a normal person, but you would just feel dehydrated sometimes? Like, What's the deal on that? And you think the Warrens would be better at their job and know to not let the demons move from one body into another body. But back to my story of Mr. Johnson. These demons started to drive him crazy, and then one day he snapped and attacked his landlord. He stabbed him multiple times, which led to his death. Johnson was arrested, and during the trial he used the defense of being possessed, where the Warrens actually came in to speak on the matter, since they kinda were the reason that the demons were in his body. Now, even though these demons were floating around in him, apparently he was still sent to prison, which I think is the right thing to do. Next on the list, guys, we have the Perron family. This is a very disturbing case that is one of the most famous that the Warrens investigated. If you have seen the movie The Conjuring, then you'll have an idea of what went on here. This is the case the movie was based on. And to be fair, the real case is actually even scarier. This was when the Perron family moved into a home back in 1971. They were probably happy to have a house that was such a steal, but all of that happiness would go away when they found out what was going on within the walls. Turns out the whole place was infested with ghosts. At first it seemed like nothing too big. There were small items that would go missing and dirt that would show up in rooms. Then things started to get more intense. Their beds would float and people started to see ghosts walk through the halls. The Perron family started to look into what was going on in this home, and they found out that many people had died on the property. A lot of them had taken their own life, and there were even people who had hung themselves, or even creepier, some people had drowned themselves behind the house in a river. The Warrens came through and were able to perform an exorcism to clean up the house, and the Perrons eventually stopped having ghostly troubles. Next on the list, guys, we have the White Lady of Union Cemetery. The Union Cemetery is one of the most famously haunted places in America. This has been a hotspot for ghosts since the 1700s. Now, the Warrens weren't the first to come in and investigate this place for being packed with ghosts, but they did some pretty intense experiments to try and confirm their beliefs that ghosts were haunting the area. Ed went in there and spent 7 nights in the cemetery. That's like one of those questions where someone's like, what would you do for $1 million? Would you spend 7 nights in a cemetery? But this dude was doing it just for poops and giggles. I'm not going anywhere near that thing unless I'm getting at least 10K. But Ed did get exactly what he was looking for. During one of his nights in the cemetery, he saw a figure of a woman who was crying and walking towards him, but shadow figures came out and stopped her from reaching Ed. He snapped a picture that looked like a big white blob, but he claims that this was the White Lady using her electromagnetic energy to grab his attention. Next on the list, we have the Bowley Church hauntings. The Warrens better be racking up a lot of money for all the movies that were made about their adventures. I hope that I live such a wild life that when I get old, people make movies about what I did. Now, if you have seen the movie The Nun, then you will know the backbone of this story. I don't think I need to state that the movies exaggerate what happened in real life, but this did take place at a church. There were reports of some creepy things happening. There was a headless ghost that would be seen walking around the church that people thought was a monk. There was the ghost of a dead nun that was seen walking around as well. Apparently, there was a body found of a nun in the walls of the church. It's thought that she could have been buried alive for having an affair with one of the monks. Damn, dude. They really didn't take stuff lightly back then. Next on the list, we have Bill Ramsey. Now, out of all the ones on this list, it would seem that this one would be probably the coolest. From the time Bill Ramsey was a kid, he had some pretty crazy things going on. He was insanely strong, and he would sometimes act like an animal. Maybe he was just a weird kid, and no one really cared because eventually he started acting normal. That's until he was a grown man. He started to crave blood and would wake up in the middle of the night panting like an animal. Eventually, he has to be locked up for the protection of the people around him when he started to attack people, and it took 6 cops to take him down. The Warrens came in and performed an exorcism, and after that, he was as right as rain. Next on this, guys, we have the Smurl family. It would seem that you couldn't move into a new home in the 70s or 80s without having something to do with ghosts inside of it already. Well, the Warrens were hot on the trail of this one after the Smurl family was attacked by several ghosts in their home. People were pushed down the stairs, the dog was thrown against the wall, items in the home were broken, and even things that were too graphic for this channel happened. The Warrens came in and pushed the ghosts out, and while doing so, they saw a dark being appear out of the floor and float up to the ceiling. Next on the list, guys, we have the Enfield Poltergeist. Not every case with the Warrens turned into them being the masters of the spectral realm. Sometimes people wanted nothing to do with them. There was the case of the Enfield Poltergeist, where there was apparently a kid who had a ghost living inside of him. Now, there were a bunch of reports saying that this kid was just making this up, but this didn't stop the Warrens from investigating. They heard word of a ghost and they wanted to get to the bottom of it. But when they showed up, they didn't even tell the family that they were coming. They thought they were famous enough to just be allowed to walk around around any rumor of a ghost. I think the clout was getting to their head a little bit. But what ended up happening was the family didn't even let them into the house. The family talked to them for a little bit, but that's about as far as they got in terms of removing a ghost from a child. Next on the list, guys, we have the haunting in Connecticut. If I move into a new place, one of the first things I'm going to ask is if there has ever been a dead body in the house. It would seem that most ghost problems come from a slew of corpses hanging out in the basement at one time or another, and that's exactly what we have here. It was Carmen and Al Snydecker that needed to move into a new home so they could be closer to the hospital. See, their son was very sick and they wanted to be able to rush over at a moment's notice. Because of their desperation, they moved into a home that used to be a mortuary. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of ghost activity hanging around in the home. The family saw a ton of spectral activity. There was dead bodies that would rise out of the ground, blood would come out of the tap, spirits would walk down the hall. Now there has been a ton of evidence to disprove a lot of the stuff the Warrens have said about the home, but I would like to add on the craziest thing that they said was causing the haunting. The Warrens claimed that the spirits who haunt the home were angry because the people who used to work in the morgue would have sex with the dead bodies. Yeah, I didn't know ghosts cared that much about what happened to their bodies after they died. And also, how do you get those kind of details from a ghost? It's additions like that that make you question whether or not the Warrens were actually telling the truth. Alright guys, next we have the Annabelle doll. This has to be one of the most famous cases the Warrens have ever investigated thanks to the Annabelle movies. Now the movies spruced her up a little bit, having her looking like an old Victorian doll, but she was actually a Raggedy Ann doll, which makes her much less menacing. But the stories surrounding this haunting figure are still pretty terrifying. The Annabelle doll was owned by a nurse back in the 70s who thought that it was just a cute little thing until it started to wake her up in the middle of the night with the sounds of crying and dreams of her being strangled by the doll. Yeah, at this point she should have burned it. But the girl got in contact with the Warrens and found out that the doll was possessed by a demonic spirit. So what was the best course of action? Burn the doll, maybe? No, instead put in a glass case on display in the Warrens Museum. Don't worry, they made sure that the case was blessed by holy water. And next on the list, guys, we have the Amityville Horror House. There has been movie after movie of this horror house, and even if you don't believe in ghosts, you have to admit that everything that went down in this house was pretty nuts. So the story starts with Ronald J. Defoe. This dude lived in the house with his family and then one day just snapped. He took a rifle and killed his whole family. That is insane and terrifying, but maybe the dude just went crazy and had nothing to do with ghosts. But then the Lutz family moved in and they said that a ton of horrific things happened while they were living in the house. They saw ghosts, they smelt rotting bodies, eyes would appear in rooms, their daughter would talk to an imaginary friend named Jody, and everyone in the family was constantly getting into fights. The family only lasted a month in the house before they fled because they were worried about ripping the family apart. After all this, the Warrens came in and they said that there was a demonic being in the house, and Lorraine saw bodies laid out on the floor through her psychic powers. And then they found out that back in the 1900s, someone used the house to practice black magic.
Off in our number 10 spot, we have the Antonellis. The story of this haunting starts off with Mrs. Antonelli, who, in February of 1966, claimed that while everyone else in the house was sleeping, she saw some sort of apparition. She explains that it was a mass of gray mist that had 4 distinct appendages, and she said it was bright and looked as if it were in sort of a bubble. No one, including her own husband, believed the things she had seen until a year later. It was at this point that one day, while Mr. Antonelli was home alone, he suddenly, out of nowhere, heard a quote ungodly scream, and when he looked in the direction that it came from, he saw the stairs in his house, but suddenly they appeared as if they went on forever. He sat down, he had a few coffees and cigarettes, like I think anyone would after seeing something like that, and after he thought it was over and went back to the housework he was doing, but he certainly was not right. Basically, it said that he put a hammer down about 7 to 10 feet away from the top of the stairs, and then all of a sudden the hammer came flying down them. He went to grab it, put it down again, and this time it suddenly flew right over his shoulder. It is said that when his family came home, he was still ghostly white and this time had 2 cigarettes in his mouth. From here, it is said that many other family members would go on to also experience very strange and unexplainable occurrences. It is said that for the Warrens, even in their long and full careers, this was one of the most interesting cases that they ever investigated. In our number 9 spot today, we have The Devil Made Me Do It. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to like this video, hit that thumbs up button if you're enjoying it so far. This is the Ed and Lorraine Warren story that is behind the 2021 Conjuring movie. In 1980, 1981, Arn Johnson was accused of taking the life of his landlord, Alan Bono. Ed and Lorraine had been called to the house prior to this taking place because the family believed that the younger brother of Arn's fiancée had been possessed by a demon, but when their paranormal investigations began, Ed and Lorraine claimed that Arn was also possessed by some sort of demon. The trial of Alan's killing ended up marking a point in time, as it was the first time demonic possession was used as a not guilty plea. In this case it was unsuccessful, but it went on to be one of the most historic cases of Ed and Lorraine's. In our number 8 spot today we have The Conjuring. Of course we have to talk about this case because it is the one that really started a lot of our more modern interest in Ed and Lorraine cases. The house, often referred to now as the Conjuring House, was built in 1736, and it wasn't anything special and didn't really gain its fame until the family of Roger and Carolyn Perron moved in 1971. They claimed to experience terrible things like the smell of rotting flesh, witnessing something levitate in their beds as they slept, and one of the family members even claimed to have been possessed by a spirit. The family of course called Ed and Lorraine to come and investigate and hopefully help them out. Once there, the pair claimed that there was in fact a spirit haunting the home, and it was that of Bathsheba Sherman, who is said to have been a witch who previously lived in the house and who was buried in the cemetery nearby. The investigators had to make several trips to the house over the span of a few years, but as of now it is said that the house belongs to new owners who continue to open their doors to paranormal investigators. In our number 7 spot today we have Leslie. Leslie was a 19-year-old student who was attending college in Hartford when she encountered the Warrens. Leslie came from quite a well-off New York family, but in the end she came to the Warrens for help because she was experiencing these unexplainable bouts of depression and anger, and she wanted to see them resolved. She actually, in the beginning, only met with Ed, and when she did, she explained to him that she had previously called upon demons and even the devil himself in order to help her win the love of a boy back home. Apparently she had won the boy, and now Satan was on the way to claim her soul, which is why she needed the help of the Warrens before it became too late. In our number 6 spot today we have Amityville. One of the cases that is perhaps the most famous of Ed and Lorraine's is that of the Amityville haunting. In the 1970s, couple George and Kathy Lutz contacted the paranormal pair because they claimed that their house was haunted by some sort of violent demonic presence. They said that this presence was so intense it forced them to have to leave their home. Considering the dark history this home had just before the couple had moved in, that includes the lives of the family who lived in the house before being taken, it wasn't necessarily a stretch to believe that the house was haunted by some sort of evil spirit. In the end, the Warrens investigated the home and backed up these claims that the Lutzes had, which is part of the reason why this case ended up launching its own multi-million-dollar franchise afterwards. In our number 5 spot today we have The Vampire. This story is said to be that of a sort of possession, which I honestly wasn't expecting. It is said that the subject in this case, who isn't named, began to have an interest in the occult because of a sort of curiosity with morbidity and death. This then led to her starting to practice satanic rituals, which, listen, we can all express ourselves how we choose, but just be careful, you know, because for this woman, these rituals led to a bloodlust. She soon found herself waiting outside of cemeteries and dark places trying to find a young man to prey upon. She would bite them like what you would expect a vampire to do, but it is said that these bites were only to satisfy her craving and hunger, and that the bites were never serious. I'm just saying, serious injury or not, it's pretty messed up. It is said that during her interview with Ed Warren, the woman confessed to having bitten 16 different people in this way. In our number 4 spot today we have West Point. This story starts off when Ed and Lorraine were called to a military academy in West Point, New York. When the couple arrived, it is said that Lorraine could sense what was going on. She felt the presence of an Irish cook named Molly. She explained that Molly was a bit clumsy and messy, but this wasn't the only presence, however. The officers at the academy would complain about a ghost moving objects around their living quarters. It was later identified as a ghost named Greer, which, after some research, turned out to be quite eerie. This is because it is believed that the ghost might have been that of Lawrence Greer. This man was a Buffalo soldier until it is said that he turned into a killer. Here's the really creepy part though. I mean, as if being a killer isn't creepy enough. It is said that after Greer's trial, there is no record of what happened to him. In our number 3 spot today we have Union Cemetery. The Union Cemetery in Easton, Connecticut is known as one of the most haunted cemeteries in the United States, which definitely says a lot. The most famous of all of its hauntings is a presence that is referred to as the White Lady. There are many people who have experienced this ghostly presence, and many people have seen her walking in front of their cars as they drive near the cemetery. That is all exactly why, in 1990, the Warrens decided to experience it for themselves when they set up cameras in this haunted location. It is said that just after 2:40 a.m. they heard the sound of weeping, and a paranormal figure began to move several feet in their direction. It is said that as they witnessed this, Ed tried to slowly approach her, but she suddenly vanished just as quickly as she had appeared. In our number 2 spot today, we have the origin story. We talk a lot about the most famous cases of the Warrens, like the ones that inspired the Conjuring movies, or Haunting in Connecticut, or The Nun, but what we don't really talk about is how the Warrens got into the occult themselves. I mean, most people, especially in their day, don't wake up and suddenly go, I think I'm gonna dedicate my life to the paranormal, so something must have happened to pique their interest, right? Well, apparently for Ed Warren, it started at quite a young age. It is said that Ed realized at only age 5 that his house was haunted. Apparently he witnessed a glowing orb and a terrifying woman's face coming out of his closet. I mean, that would be horrible to see as a grown adult. I can't imagine at that age, but it fully makes sense as to why he later became so interested in the things he did. Before Ed and Lorraine became the names they are today, it is said that in order to help the pair get a foot in the door, literally into haunted homes, Ed used his passion for painting. He used this by painting homeowners pictures of their houses. Clearly something he did must have worked. In our number 1 spot today, we have The Haunting in Connecticut. If you've ever seen or read The Haunting in Connecticut, this is a home and a story that might be a little familiar. In 1986, the Snedeker family moved into a new rental home that at one time had previously been a funeral home. In the basement, the family found some less than welcoming items that were left from the home's previous life. Shortly after moving in, however, their discoveries would become more gruesome as they began to have reports of evil coming from the house. These included attacks on the family members, seeing apparitions, and they even explained violent personality changes from one of the members. When Ed and Lorraine investigated the house, they were able to confirm that it was in fact haunted. It is said that one of the most frightening things that took place in the house, aside from the rumors of possession, was one day when a family member was mopping the floor and all of a sudden the water suddenly turned blood red.
At number 10, we have the Connecticut Poltergeist. I found a video clip of Ed and Lorraine investigating the haunting of a Connecticut home. This haunting was later the basis for the movie The Haunting in Connecticut, because they were being haunted in Connecticut. It makes so much sense. Ed Warren says that this is one of the most compelling pieces of evidence for poltergeist activity caught on camera. The family were being plagued by ghostly activity and wanted help, so they called demonologists. It seems in the footage, Ed is holding a seance to contact a spirit. This is what happens when he asks who's there.
1 knock for yes, 2 for no. Are you a man? Are you a boy?
Then this is what happens when asked if the young spirit wants the family to leave.
You want the people in this house to move? 1 knock for yes, 2 for no. Yes.
The Warrens also recorded this footage of the poltergeist moving chairs.
Give me some sign.
Later, the poltergeist is shown trying to pull a chair out from under a child. Years later, Lorraine was interviewed about the house and she said the spirits were cleared with an exorcism. She also said this.
There was a very old tree that was right in front of this house. There was no wind at all, no wind whatsoever, and the tree broke in half.
Coming into number 9, we have the White Lady of Union Cemetery. Ed and Lorraine have investigated many cases and usually have been the duo behind the case's fame. The White Lady of Union Cemetery long since outdates and surpasses the Warrens. Nonetheless, the pair did have a scary moment there and even caught a ghost on camera. The cemetery is in eastern Connecticut and the site dates back to the 1700s. The graveyard is said to be haunted by a plethora of ghosts, the White Lady being just one of them. Ed stayed in the graveyard for 7 nights and saw ghost lights filling up the place. He said on September 1st, 1990, he experienced something particularly scary. He said he heard a woman weeping. He said shadow ghosts tried to stop the woman getting to him, and this was the photo he took. This is what he had to say.
Your stereotype ghost right here.
Isn't that beautiful?
The electromagnetic energy taken from the plant life in the cemetery is used by the spirit to form this image.
Coming into number 8, we have the devil. Ed Ed and Lorraine Warren met the devil and they testified to it. This all went down in 1981 when they were called into a murder trial. Arnie Cheyenne Johnson claimed to have killed his landlord because the devil made him do it. It all started with a possessed 11-year-old David Glatzel. This is where Ed and Lorraine first stepped into the picture. The pair were called in to try and rid the boy of the demon along with Catholic priests. Over several days the group did eventually get rid of the demon, however, according to them, the demon fled into his brother 18-year-old Arnie's body. Oof. A few months later, he killed his landlord in an argument. His defense lawyer argued that he was possessed. Now here is a clip of Ed talking about Arnie.
And he screamed at these devils, "Take me on. Leave my little buddy alone." He got his wish.
He challenged the demonic.
He challenged the demonic.
Then he says this about when he became possessed.
And Arnie disappeared for a few minutes. When he came back, he was somebody entirely different.
Ed and Lorraine spoke at his trial and attested to the fact that he was indeed possessed by the devil. Thus ensued a media blitz around the case. The pair then wrote a book called The Devil in Connecticut following the incident. Arnie Cheyenne Johnson served just 5 years in jail. Coming into number 7, we have the Borley Rectory. According to demonologists, ghost hunters and psychics like Ed and Lorraine, the Borley Rectory is the most haunted place in the United Kingdom. The building was constructed in Victorian times in Essex, and rumours of its hauntings were rife from the very beginning. Ghost hunters claimed the activity is related to a Benedictine monastery built in the area in 1362. A monk was said to have been executed, and a nun bricked alive in the walls of a convent after the pair had an affair. Obviously, good old Ed and Lorraine had to go for a jaunt to check it out. When talking about their first experience at the property, Lorraine said that she was with a skeptical newspaper reporter. She shares an experience of what happened to him.
Something is hitting me. It's hitting me. It's hitting me. And he was absolutely hysterical.
Ugh, a hitting ghost, not what you need. Then she continued by saying,
He said, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe."
Later, Lorraine said that a recording taken at the church at this moment revealed a woman's voice saying,
Hit him. Hit him. Almost in a healing way. And you hear her very gentle voice.
Chilling. Was the monk hitting him because the nun wanted him to? Coming into number 6, we have The Witch of Harrisville. Some of you guys may have seen The Conjuring. Well, that horrifying movie is based on a house that the Warrens investigated in Rhode Island. Now, this house was haunted by a witch called Bathsheba Sherman. She is said to have cursed the land so that whoever lived on it in the future would die. What a babe. One of the Perron family members, Andrea, discusses her time in the house. In this clip, she's talking about her sister.
And the door opened to the pantry, and April looked up at my mother and she said, "Mommy, something really bad happened in there." Indeed. It's where little Prudence Arnold had her throat cut.
Ed and Lorraine visited the home and exorcised the witch. Or did they? When members from the Ed and Lorraine Warren Museum visited Bathsheba's grave, this is what they heard.
Don't be scared.
Kill? Who are you gonna kill?
Coming into number 5, we have the Enfield Poltergeist. The Enfield Poltergeist was a case investigated by Ed and Lorraine in 1977. The pair travelled to England to investigate the rumoured haunted home in North London. They deduced the mysterious goings-on were a result of demonic possession. The residents recorded sounds that took place in a bedroom after their children had gone to bed. Now bear in mind, in the 70s, not a lot of people had video recording equipment or even audio recording equipment.
The lights gone out. Oh. Wait. Squeeze the light out.
Throw the lamp
on the edge.
right way across the room and pull it out of the socket.
So we hear screaming and confusion as the lights go out. It seems as if a lamp was pulled out of the socket. Then this happens.
Who's that shaking the door? What's on there? Mum's laughing. Oh!
It seems a slipper was used as a projectile by some kind of ghoul and thrown across the room. Over a period of 18 months, more than 30 people, including neighbours, fellow psychic researchers and journalists, said that they saw furniture moving of its own accord and objects being thrown across the room. It was even said that one of the children in the house levitated. Spooky. The events that took place in this Enfield house make up the inspiration behind The Conjuring 2. Coming into number 4, very famous, we have Amityville. In a 2013 interview, Lorraine Warren said that this case haunted her the most. She said, "I will never go in the Amityville house again." What happened in this house that made a self-confessed expert demonologist scared to return? The story goes that in 1974, 23-year-old Ronald J. Defoe Jr. murdered his entire family when they slept at their home in Amityville. He killed 6 people. Now these were said to be his 4 siblings and his parents. He said he heard voices that told him to do it. After a year, the house was eventually purchased for just $80,000, although the buyers, the Lutz family, stayed just 28 days because of the horror they experienced. George and Kathy Lutz said that they saw slime coming out of the walls, knives being thrown from counters, figures wandering and wailing. George even said that he saw his wife levitating and an evil red-eyed pig-like creature glaring at him. Ed and Lorraine were brought in along with a priest to rid the house of spirits. In an interview, Ed said,
When we went into the house that day, we didn't realize that it was diabolically infested. And on a scale of 1 to 10, I would have to say that Amityville was a 10.
Oh my god. The pair believed that it was the house that cursed the murderer rather than the murderer that cursed the house. Today, there have been 18 different films about the home. Okay, because Amityville was so scary it gets 2 points of its very own. We have The Ghost Boy at number 3. This picture was taken by Ed Warren as he investigated the Amityville house. The picture shows what appears to be a demonic boy. The Warrens suspected it could be one of the youngest children with his eyes glowing from the infrared film. The Warrens believe that this is one of the most credible pieces of evidence for ghosts ever caught on camera. Honestly, it gives me chills to look at this picture. Coming into number 2, we have the very famous Annabelle doll. So many of you will know the horrifying story of Annabelle, a possessed real doll behind the Annabelle and Conjuring franchise. Ed and Lorraine were called upon by 2 young women to deal with an out-of-control Raggedy Ann doll. The doll then became infamous for being demonically possessed, perpetuating the trope for the demon dolly. Annabelle lives in a locked case in the Warrens Occult Museum. Now there isn't any video evidence of the doll being a menace, but things did get pretty scary recently when the doll was moved in a Facebook Live video. On hand at the Warrens Museum were Dan Rivera and Tony Sepra, who were handling the move. Dan says this about Annabelle.
The most diabolical, most haunted, most evil item in the occult museum.
And he is also charged with moving the doll. Tony explains how Dan has made it safe to move Annabelle here.
As long as your skin is not going to be in contact with the aura of that doll, which is touching the surface of the doll with your human hands. You don't want to do that.
Before the doll is moved, the pair pray.
Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle, be our protection against the malice and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who wander through the world for the ruin of souls. Amen.
Okay, watch as they move the doll now, it's really tense.
Okay, quickly. Right over here. Go into the new case.
They then pray again, and also tell a story about a guy who provoked Annabelle by tapping on her case. According to the duo, the man died that evening in a bike accident. Okay, finally, arguably one of the most haunted places in the world, a truly terrifying place. I'm not sure I'd even ever set foot in it. We have the Occult Museum. So this is one of the scariest things that Ed and Lorraine ever experienced together. This was the creation of their Occult Museum in Monroe, Connecticut. This is what Lorraine said about the place when she was leading a tour of her home.
You're in probably one of the most haunted places in the world because of the things that are in here. Everything in here has been taken from some place where people were either killed or maimed or so many ways. So it's tragic for me.
So basically it's the culmination of all of their scary cases in one. In the museum you can find Annabelle, no thanks, and the Conjuring mirror, and way more. She says you should never ever touch anything in the museum. Now despite living with Annabelle in the museum, this is Lorraine's reaction when she walks by her.
This is the worst thing in here, is that doll. I'm not gonna stare at it though. So you can take the picture, but I'm not gonna stare at it because that has done bad harm on a lot of people.
A priest circulates the museum daily to bless the space.
Father, and of the Son, of the Holy Spirit, amen.
What has been done is circular embolism, which is prayers, are said all the time, to pray.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
White Lady of Union Cemetery. Located in Easton, Connecticut, the Union Cemetery is widely regarded as one of the most haunted cemeteries in the US. Built in the 1700s, it's the host to hundreds of grave sites, and allegedly some of the spirits of those buried there still linger around their plots. Chief among these is the White Lady, a woman with long dark hair wearing a white nightgown and a bonnet to match. Ed Warren visited here to investigate the various claims of paranormal activity, including the ghostly red eyes of a man burned to death across the street that peer at you from the bushes. He claimed he was able to catch the lady in white on film and to have attempted to dispel her spirit, but there have been many sightings since, including one where the ghostly figure dented a car that drove through her as she appeared. Amateur and professional investigators frequent the cemetery to find out anything they can about the restless spirits here. Number 9. South End Werewolf. 9-year-old Bill Ramsey was playing in his back garden when he felt a sudden chill wash over him, and he suddenly started smelling something foul. He reported that suddenly an intense rage entered his body and he was flooded with strength. He pulled a fence post out of the ground with the fence still attached and began to swing it around like a club. Now, I've put up a fence or two in my day, and those posts are not anything close to light. So this 9-year-old has some major strength or something else fueling him. But it didn't stop there. He then began gnawing on the wire and growling. His parents were frightened and remained inside until he calmed down. And over the next 30 years, he only had a few incidents, nearly attacking his wife in his sleep, allegedly growing claws, and attacking and biting a friend while they were in a car. Over a year later, he went to the hospital after experiencing chest pains, where he suddenly bit a nurse, and patients report seeing him with a hunched back, growing claws from his hands, and having superhuman strength. He attacked multiple police officers and was tranquilized. Many more incidents like this occurred, and doctors ran every test they had but found no anomalies. So, Bill went to visit the Warrens, who performed an exorcism with the help of a bishop, during which he began to transform one last time before the demon was cast out. The Warrens even filmed this, and to this day, the case still baffles doctors and mental health professionals, as there have been no incidents since, but he has been inactive for this long before, so who knows. Number 8, the Lindley Street Haunting. This was indeed a haunting in Connecticut, but not that one. That comes later. Man, that state sure has a lot of famous ghost stories. In 1974, Gerard and Laura Gooden reported to the police that they had been under attack by some unseen forces that were lifting and throwing furniture, breaking windows, and even making their cat talk, or even sing, as one person recalls. The Warrens were called to investigate and found that the Goodens' adopted daughter Marcia may have had something to do with it, perhaps being possessed by a demon, as most of the unexplainable behavior started not soon after they brought her into their home for the first time. Banging from inside the walls and doors slamming were just the beginning. There were even multiple witnesses who verified all of these happenings, one of which tried to burn the house down to dispel the evils inside. Eventually, Marcia confessed to faking the strange activity herself and that it was all a hoax, which set the legal cases to rest. But no one could explain the crazy things that happened while Marcia was not in the house, or why things continued to move and float for a long time after everything was put to bed. And people still attempt to visit the house now to conduct paranormal investigations, though the current owners want nothing to do with that and do not wish to speak about their house's haunted history. Number 7, the case of Arne Johnson. One of the many cases that has now become a feature film, the story of murder and possession is still hotly contested by legal scholars and paranormal investigators alike. More well known as The Devil Made Me Do It, the case sees the first time in United States legal history that a claim of demonic possession and denial of personal responsibility was used as a defense for a crime. A family member of Johnson's had recently had an exorcism performed on him by the Warrens, and during that ceremony, Arn taunted the demon that exited the boy and told it to enter him. Arn began to exhibit strange behaviors, including disassociating, growling, and claiming that the demon had forced him to drive his car into a tree. After a party at their new apartment with many people who lived and worked in the building, Johnson stabbed the building's landlord 20 times in the chest, leaving many wounds, including one that went from his stomach all the way up to his heart, and he died shortly after. Johnson maintains that he had no memory of the event at all, and in court argued that he had seen the demon in him many times before in reflections and claimed demonic possession as a defense. This is probably the main reason that this case is still so often thought of and is still being investigated. It was also the first unlawful killing in the history of this town of Brookfield, also in Connecticut. Go figure. Number 6. West Point. In October of 1972, the US Army was having the Warrens give a general lecture to the students at the military academy, but a few days before, the executive officer phoned them up and asked if they could come down early to investigate a security problem they were experiencing. The problem the officer called them about, a haunting at the superintendent's house, wasn't the only investigation they ended up undertaking. While they resolved the issue at the officer's home, the moving books and missing items were due to some spirits which were dispelled, causing no problems from then on. They caught wind from a few students that there was another haunted area on campus, room 4714. In the North Barracks, 2 cadets were asleep when suddenly a ghostly figure in a uniform from the 1830s wielding a musket appeared right in front of them. His stare and sheer presence made the boys freeze in fear, and then he disappeared. He was seen multiple times after that, but the Warrens did their work, and an exorcism was performed, and no one sleeps in that room anymore, though many students attempt to contact and look for the spirit that once resided here. Number 5. The Smurl House. In the 1970s, Jack and Janet Smurl purchased a new townhouse in Pennsylvania and moved in with their children. Soon after, as so often happens in these cases, strange things started happening. Items would go missing, voices would be heard when no one was near, knocking from inside walls, and even a chandelier falling and almost killing Janet. There were also reports of problems with electric devices, something paranormal experts attribute to demons and spirits affecting electromagnetic fields. The family called Ed and Lorraine after the church refused their request for help when claw marks appeared on the inside of their doors, and they arrived and collected video and audio recordings of the creepy events they saw take place and used the evidence to secure an exorcism, or 3 actually, none of which worked, the family says. They moved out in 1989 trying to escape the demons inside, and apparently they have, but paranormal experts still want to look into the house more to see what entities still reside there. Number 4. Satan's Harvest. A few of these stories have appeared in the movie universe that follows some of Ed and Lorraine's cases, and so they are well known, but sometimes the movie misses the mark. Maurice Theriault, also known as Frenchie, was a farmer in New England who grew up in a home which only got more and more violent and sadistic as he grew older, being forced to watch and participate in horrible events. He asked for help from so many people, including God and Satan, really trying to cover his bases, but no one came to help. As he grew, he found himself knowing things he should have no knowledge of, being stronger than he had any right to be, and he began to hear voices. His father sabotaged his chance at finishing school and joining the army to keep him on the farm. Later on, the family started to notice strange things happening too. Frenchie would lose periods of time. Small fires would randomly appear around the property, and they began to hear voices from within the walls. You would follow Frenchie into a room only to turn the corner and have him not be there, but back where you both just came from. When the Warrens visited, they immediately sensed evil forces and began the process of an exorcism, which Frenchie wanted, but his body resisted. Upside down crosses appeared scratched into his body. He started bleeding from the forehead, and he randomly began to attack and strangle his wife while being exorcised. And the craziest part of all of this is that it was all caught on tape, leaving people the ability to watch and research the case on their own. Maurice appears as a character in a number of the Conjuring films, notably The Nun, though his story in the movies is not close to what really happened. Number 3. The Snedeker House. Here we go, back to Connecticut again, this time for the actual haunting in Connecticut. Wow, how many times can I say Connecticut in this video? Connecticut, Connecticut. In 1986, the Snedeker family moved into a simple home in Southington. Over time, they found more and more evidence that their house had once been a funeral home. They found blood drains, a gurney, toe tags, lots of spooky stuff. And soon they were reporting violent attacks, apparitions, and personality changes in their oldest son. The Warrens attributed this to a former mortician who regularly practiced necromancy, and those troubled demons were coming back to haunt the place they were never allowed to rest in. The movie shows some pretty harrowing scenes, which, according to the family, family are close to what happened, though reports have come out of the son admitting to some of the behavior, and much of the rest was sensationalized. The subsequent owners of the house have had no issues since the exorcism, but horror aficionados still make the pilgrimage to see one of the most well-known haunted places for themselves. Number 2. Borley Rectory. After hearing about a string of spooky events at the Borley Church, including bells ringing without warning, sights of a headless monk leaving messages on the walls, and a ghostly nun walking the halls at night, which is where the inspiration for the nun came from, the Warrens hired a crack team of paranormal photographers to investigate the site with them, and boy did they ever find something. In many photos, including on infrared film, they captured the ghost of a nun walking through the aisles and praying. Allegedly, the nun was burned alive in the walls of the convent after she had an affair with a monk, and walks the halls trying to repent for her sins. There's a lot of interesting stuff here, with the church having burned down in the 40s, countless reports of these apparitions. It's no wonder why people flock here to find something spooky for themselves. And finally, number 1, the Perron house. The tragedy of the Perron family is what the first Conjuring film was based on, so I'm sure many of you already know the story, but I'll give you the basics. Carolyn, Roger, and their 5 daughters moved into a farmhouse in Rhode Island in 1971, and immediately things started to go wrong, like so many other cases. The sound of scraping metal and objects appearing in different rooms, and then they started to notice the presence of spirits. Many members of the previous owner's family died in mysterious circumstances. Many drowned, some took their own lives, and others had their lives taken from them too soon. And these were just some of the spirits that haunted them. There was also the spirit of a witch here, Bathsheba, who killed their neighbor and cursed the land before hanging herself from a tree outside. She was apparently the most vengeful and violent, and caused injury and mental trauma to many of the family members, and a seance was performed by the Warrens to attempt to rid the house of her presence. This house is still standing, and in the past few years many teams have gone out to the property and used technology to search the grounds for bodies buried there. There is a small cemetery not too far from the property where there is a headstone for Bathsheba, but they may find some other horrifying things on or under the property as they continue investigations and continue the Warrens' work.